man of many talents, an artist, a photographer, scenery painter.
Indeed.
Singer.
If you can call it that.
Husband, father, and now autobiographer. And I'm glad to say, personal friend of mine. So I'm going to introduce you properly to potentially Chatham, Rochester's loveliest man, most talented man, certainly the tallest man, and you can't miss him on any high street, the lovely Simon Mills.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. My dad was terrified at the thought of me becoming an artist, but it was too late. The die had been cast many years before when my mum discovered a figure of a stick man that I'd drawn on the wallpaper at the foot of our stairs. She was very angry with me, but when I denied responsibility and blamed my sister, who was too young to have done it, she'd been about 2 at the time, she became furious and locked me in my bedroom. I grabbed the back scrubbing brush with the fish's head that was there because I used to play with it, and I smashed it against the door until it shattered the head. My mum finally unlocked the door and was now even more angry because I'd broken the brush. I was upset that my fish was broken, didn't care that it was the family scrubbing brush. Anyway, I've always thought that this episode was what made me think that art was an act of rebellion.
Well, evidently you did become an artist, as we all know. So how did you change your dad's mind?
Well, I didn't. He was adamant that if I became an artist, I would be very poor, and he insisted that the only alternative was that I should do architecture. I should point out that he had a pathological terror of poverty because a great-grandfather of his had died in the workhouse many years before. And also, I think he believed the common theory that artists all struggle in garrets and die in poverty, sort of thing that's put about by Hollywood. And also, I think his favourite opera was La Bohème, so I think I was Rodolfo, struggling in the attic. So I had little or no interest in architecture, although I quite liked drawing it. That was when I was about 13, and it's from the window in the school. And then the next one was a design for the school magazine I did when I was about 15. So I liked drawing architecture, but I didn't want to actually design buildings. So I decided to compromise and go along with the idea because it meant I could continue to do art at school. The problem was that the school didn't believe that art was a serious subject and certainly not suitable for someone who had over a dozen O-levels. They even told me there was no such thing as A-level art. Fortunately, I was persistent enough to discover that they were lying and was able to insist that I could take the exam. The arrangement was that I would study maths, physics and chemistry officially and do the art in my spare time.
So what kind of school was it?
It was a typical English public school. If anyone here has ever seen If by Lindsay Anderson, starred Malcolm McDowell, who then went on to make Clockwork Orange, you'll have a very good idea of what the school was like. The only difference between that school and my school is that the school in the film, the prefects all wear silly embroidered waistcoats. I was younger and smaller than all the others, but because I was considered to be bright, I was forever being moved up a year. This made things worse. I may have been able to keep up with the others academically, but it became harder and harder to be accepted socially, and I was bullied relentlessly. The culture of a public school is such that no matter how bad things are, it's impossible to seek help from anywhere because the threat was that it would make it worse. So my parents never knew the misery I was going through. I never really understood why I was singled out for abuse. I think I always assumed that it was because of being smaller, more sensitive, and with a tendency to cry. Crying was about the worst thing you could do at school, and it would be years before I could hold back the tears. I would often cry all the way home, but I'd have to make sure that I'd wiped all traces of the tears off my face before I went into the house, because I couldn't let my mum see that I'd been crying. One year, a rumour went round that when we had swimming, we would have to be naked. Even at the age of 8, the idea filled me with absolute horror, and I asked my parents to write to the school to excuse me from this torture. My dad said, I had to do it, and it did me no harm. I felt deeply betrayed and never fully forgave him. It was, of course, not a rumour, and swimming became one of my most dreaded school activities, one that I'd frequently tried to get excused from by doing things like wearing a finger stall, claiming to have an infection. Needless to say, the teacher in charge never believed me. We had to continue to swim naked until we were 13 or 14 or thereabouts, under the lascivious, lecherous eyes of the horrible old teacher. On Friday afternoons, we had CCF, Combined Cadet Force, or Corps as we called it. There were alternatives to Corps in either bookbinding or printing, either of which I would have loved to do, but when I asked to do so, I was horrified when my father said, "No son of mine will do anything as sissy as that," so I was forced to join the Corps. My dad thought that because I had shown a small amount of interest in boats and sailing, it would soften the blow if I joined the newly formed naval section. This was based on the fact that school had bought a leaky whaler and a very unreliable motorboat and had them moored on the canal. Being in the naval section was probably worse than the army because the uniforms, God, gives me the creeps even now, were more absurd, and having to walk down to school dressed like a little sailor boy past the local state school, getting jeered at by the kids, was hideously embarrassing. The ancient custom of fagging still persisted, and many of the masters were ex-military and had no teaching skills whatever. They'd been given the jobs because there's nothing else they could do after they left the army. They even retained their rank, like a silly old codger called Major Marsh did. Some of them, like Reggie Gunnell, were ancient. He'd taught my dad when he was at the school, and he said that he was an old man even then, a quarter of a century earlier. I'm convinced he was senile. He had a joke, which he would tell every lesson. He called square inches squinches. Oh, bloody hell. This next bit is one of my grandson Gabriel's favourite passages from the book. Favourite might not be quite the right word, Gabriel, do you think? I hope no one will be offended. There was Spud Longrig. We called him Spud because his face looked like a potato. And in those days, you don't see potatoes with those sort of lumpy bits. Did we call them eyes? Not sure. But anyway, his nose was like one of them. Very ugly man. It's not his fault, but his behaviour was. He was a horrible man who, like old Gunnell, taught maths. But he would spend the lesson sitting at his desk, masturbating. It shocks me to this day that even though we all knew, no one said anything. During the years I was working towards the A-level, I made a momentous discovery. I found out that there were such things as art schools. Either they had been kept hidden from me, or I was incredibly naive, but whatever the case, I had no idea they existed, and the revelation was life-changing. The prospect of a career as an architect magically evaporated in an instant, and I was free. I told my dad that this is what I wanted to do. He was very reluctant, but eventually, after a lot of persuasion, gave way, but on the condition that I would become a graphic designer. I agreed, despite having no idea what graphic design was. This was the second big compromise in my life, but it didn't seem to matter because I'd achieved what I wanted and I was going to art school.
Now, the first art school that you went to was St Albans to do a foundation course. For those of us still in the peak of youth, could you tell us what it was like back then being at art school in the early 70s?
Okay. Well, it was fabulous. And that's where I met Philip, who's here today, and Peter Rumley, behind you there. Art school was a complete revelation for me. In one particular way, you could say it saved my life. I had been extruded from school as a typical product of the system. I was a racist, sexist, classist, arrogant, homophobic oik. Art school was the perfect antidote to all that conditioning. It took many years and was occasionally a painful process, but I thank my lucky stars that the transformation eventually happened. It was also greatly helped years later by the influence of my first girlfriends, who would sometimes say things like, "You don't really think that, do you?" That was still some way in the future, but in the meantime, I had at least started on the path of undoing the damage caused by the corrupt public school system that, with its outmoded militarism, jingoism and colonialism, was intended to produce Tory politicians. Fortunately, becoming another Boris Johnson wasn't my destiny. It didn't help that, having done my O-levels at 14 and my A-levels at 16, I'd been extruded from school 2 years younger than everyone else, and now found myself at a huge disadvantage socially. Oh, that's Philip. I did that a little bit later. One time we were coming back from a pub crawl in the city, and he decided to put his rucksack that had his drawing equipment and all his smoking equipment. Philip at the time was a devoted smoker, and he had stuff in his bag. You wouldn't believe it. There were clay pipes, there were cheroots, there was rolling tobacco, there was chewing tobacco, everything. But all his drawing equipment, he put it on his back, put the greatcoat over the top. He walked back from the City of London like that, with his knuckles dragging along the pavement the whole way. I was desperately trying not to be seen with it because I couldn't stop laughing. Anyway, I did that drawing later. I was also still quite small because it didn't grow until I was 18. I don't know if it was true, but I certainly felt that none of the girls were interested in me. At this remove, it might seem far-fetched to go through 4 years of art school in the early 70s as a virgin. It wasn't for want of trying. So that's me at the extreme left end, still being the shortest in the group. Our friend Jim Steele, next one along from me, he lives in Italy now. There's Peter Rumley, that's here, and that's Philip at the end there. So next picture, please. Oh, and that's a drawing. I find it quite interesting. That previous one that you saw when I did at school, of Berkhamsted School, kind of roughly drawn, it's not that different from that. This is a year or so later, but obviously the impact of the teaching at art school had started to make itself felt. My repressed public school background also made me unprepared for an encounter I had on the day I walked into the Life Room and saw Quentin Crisp in all his glory. There he is. Brilliant. Most famous life model in the world, I'm quite sure. The blue rinsed hair, the lipstick, talc, rouge and eyeshadow. I'd never seen anything like him. I'm glad to say that I soon realised that he was a fascinating man, and it was far more fun to hang around in the studio during the tea breaks, listening to him talking, than to go down to the canteen. That's a life painting I did, oil paint on paper, of Quentin. I remember once that one of the girls who had been listening to him for a while suddenly said, "You talk for the sake of talking." He paused briefly and said, "Don't you dance for the sake of dancing? Don't you sing for the sake of singing?" He enjoyed teasing artists. He once told a story about the dead people arriving at the pearly gates and St. Peter asking them each in turn what they had done in life. One says he was a poet, so St. Peter asks him to recite a poem. Another says she was a dancer, so St. Peter asks her to do a dance. The singer is asked to sing a song, and the acrobat do a turn, and so on, until the artist arrives. When St. Peter asks the question, there's a pause, and the artist says, "You'll have to come and see my studio sometime." Next image. Oh, that's a painting of the Thames from a trip we had when I was at St Albans.
Thank you. I think we'll all agree, fabulous Quentin Crisp impression.
What a man.
Okay, so that was, St Albans was your first art school, but you carried on studying art, didn't you? So where did you go next?
Well, I went to the Central School of Art, where I met Richard, who's here. A drawing of Richard doing a drawing himself. So I commuted for the first year, but then because my dad was the property manager for Eagle Star Insurance Company, I moved into a flat in a mansion block called Manor House in Marylebone that the company owned. Next picture, please. Now, if you look carefully, you can see that there are horse-drawn carriages going in front of that. This wasn't taken at the time I was there. I'm old, but I ain't that old. So it was all frightfully grand. We had a housekeeper and a porter who was called George. and he reminded me of Dr. Frankenstein's assistant in the Boris Karloff film, so I nicknamed him Igor. The name stuck, and one day someone came to visit us, and dear old George stopped him at the door and said, "I don't know you." In all innocence, our friend said, "No, but I know who you are. You're Igor." The poor old fellow was very upset and mumbled, "No, my name's George." His voice always reminded me of Spike Milligan's decrepit Goon Show character, Henry Crun, played, of course, by Peter Sellers. Walking out in the morning, I'd waved to him as he was sweeping the forecourt. "Morning, George." "Good morning, sir." "Lovely day." "I wish it would rain, sir." "Oh, why's that?" "It keeps the dust down." Well, he had a point, of course, because the dust was vile, being mostly soot from car exhausts. Cleaning our front windowsills, the inside of the windowsills, often required the use of some white spirit. And I was reminded of my mother's description of the last London smog, which was the year before I was born. She said you could see the stuff seeping in under the windows like something from a science fiction film, and it would then flow across the sill, down the walls and onto the floor. George used to disappear for a quick fag in the basement at the bottom of one of the light wells, and we noticed him one day below our kitchen window. It seemed like a good idea to chuck a glass full of water through the window, and we crouched beneath it, giggling. We heard a shout of, "Hey, who did that?" One day, Stephen and I were playing records of Schubert songs with the windows wide open, and the following day, George stopped me on my way out and said, "How's your father, sir?" "He's very well, thank you, George." "He was here yesterday, wasn't he?" No, he hasn't been around for a while." "Yes, he was. I heard him singing." What's the name of the tenor? Can't remember. Anyway, singing Schumann songs, so yes. Don't think my dad was that good. The household cavalry came thundering up Seymour Place one day. They crossed Marylebone Road and galloped on up Lisson Grove. We heard the racket from inside the flat, so we rushed upstairs to watch them go by with their cannons and paraphernalia in tow. Dear old George came over and said, "They're no better than you, sir." I said, "I know that, George, but they're very pretty." Next two images. Oh, that's, yeah. Hungerford Bridge from Waterloo Bridge. Did in that year. And then the next one. Oh, me taking a photograph of myself. So, to you.
Poor George.
Poor George, I know. So unfair. No idea. No, I mean, I moved out of the flat and he was still there. I mean, I was there for 12 years, from 72 to 84. George was still there when I left. No, I have no idea, but he'd be long dead by now, I'm sure.
Okay then, so I think the big question on everybody's lips is why would you write an autobiography but call it, "Oi, you an artist"?
Right. Well, it comes from our time at the Central. Richard and I disagree over how this came about, but I'm sticking to my version and he'll stick to his. We were packing up our stuff ready to leave at the end of the year, and I looked out of the 5th floor corridor window down into the well, and Richard was down the bottom in the car park loading one of the college easels onto the roof rack of his car. And I opened the window and shouted down in a silly voice, "Oi, you an artist?" And it kind of echoed its way down the building. He cracked up laughing. It's been one of our catchphrases ever since. So another image, please. Oh, no. That's self-portrait drawing.
Lovely, but I think everyone will agree. Gorgeous pictures. Now, as it's an autobiography and you're writing about yourself, you've been very open in the book about some pretty intimate details. Everything.
Sorry.
I would blush.
Sorry.
Okay. So if it's not too personal a question, can you tell me about your first girlfriend?
So yes, it's a French girl named Christine. Can you have the picture? There she is. Oh. She just split up with my old school friend Nick. And at a gig of his, he was a guitarist, she mentioned that she wanted to explore the Peloponnese, but had no one to go with. I said, "I'll go with you." We hired a car and followed the coast. Well, opportunist as ever. We hired a car and followed the coast road all the way round. Next one. There we go. That's Epidavros. Sleeping under the stars, and after a couple of weeks, drove over the mountains and down into Githion, where we planned to spend that night. Sleeping rough in a town isn't an easy option, so Christine suggested we find a hotel. We tried several places until eventually we were offered a bed on the roof of one of them. This was both mad and romantic, so we accepted. Unbeknownst to me, Christine had decided that we would make love that night. Until then, all we'd done was cuddle. And because Githion was where Paris had eloped with Helen, thereby sparking off the Trojan War, it was the perfect place. After dinner, we walked down to the harbour and stood holding hands, looking out over the sea. So I lost the virginity that I'd preserved, despite all my efforts, through 4 years of art school, on a rooftop under the stars in Greece with the most beautiful woman that I'd ever met at that point. She asked me in the morning how I felt, and I just smiled.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're all familiar with Simon's artwork now, I think, some beautiful canvases. But when did you start selling them? Did you start selling them when you left art college?
I wish I had been able to. No, it was just as difficult to sell paintings in 1974 as it is now. I'm just going to put that up a little bit. I did a few odd jobs, stocking shelves in an off-licence, pushing dead files around in a hospital. They're literally what the name suggests. And hanging around in the Tate Gallery posing as an attendant. Well, no, I'm joking. It was a proper job. Then I signed up with a recruitment agency called Photostaff, and I got an interview in the photographic department at Sotheby's. There we are. That's how it was then. It's a bit different now. They were looking for a printer to join their darkroom, and as I'd done a fair amount of printing, I thought I'd give it a try. My heart sank as I was shown into the darkroom because the enlargers were massive and used for printing 5-inch by 4-inch negs. So a 5/4 neg is about that size, and I was only used to little things. I didn't know such things existed, but I thought, well, I'm here, I might as well give it a go. I blagged my way through in a way that public school gives one a good grounding in, and I managed to produce 3 tolerable prints. One of them was of 2 vases, one light and one dark, and I had been expected to dodge one and burn the other. So dodging is where, as you're exposing the print, you've got a little circle or shape of something opaque on a wire, and you hold it over the thing that you're trying to make slightly less dark as the light from the projectors, the enlargers coming, and you wiggle it about. You have to wiggle it because if you keep it still, you'll see the shape of it, so you move it around. And then burning is when you've exposed it once and then you expose it again, but you've got your hands over the lens of the enlargers with a little hole like that, and you wiggle that hole around and you can see the little pool of light on the image, and that gives you an extra amount of light. So that meant that the extreme difference between the 2 vases was less apparent. I failed to do it, but once again I bluffed. Brona reckons it would have been my posh upper middle class accent that got me the job, but the photographic department at Sotheby's was the only one staffed by people without double-barrelled surnames or first names like Camilla and Octavia. Mm-hmm. I believe the reason was that I immediately liked Norman Jones, who was the head of department, and the interview, after my trial run in the darkroom, was relaxed and pleasant. Because of an expanding workload, they were taking on a 7th printer, despite there only being 6 enlargers, and the plan was to start a shift system that would increase the output. This meant that we couldn't all be there at the same time, and so at least one of us would start work at 6 o'clock in the morning, and finish at 2 in the afternoon, and then another would start at 2 and finish at 10. The idea appealed to me because I would be able to paint in my studio for almost half the day. The reality was even better, because we all quickly realised that we could get our quota, which was about 40 negs a day, done in about 3 hours. The trick was then, if you were on the morning shift, to arrive minutes before the rest of the staff and try and look like you'd been there for 3 hours. You then bash out your quota and bugger off at 2 o'clock. Likewise, if you were on the late shift, you do your work as fast as possible and slope off as soon as everyone else had gone home. It's a bit exhausting, but it had the huge advantage of seeming like a part-time job. I'd like to say that I used all the spare time for painting, but it wouldn't be completely true. However, I did get a lot of work done in those years. Next. Oh, that is a young lad posing in a costume by Picasso for a Stravinsky ballet. Most of what I did as a photographer in Sotheby's was obviously, objects of art. But every now and then I got a real live person to photograph. I did a ballerina dressed in one of the other costumes, but that was the best one. Talking of the posh crowd that all the employees of the company, apart from us lot in the photographic department, were made of, there was a chap in antiquities called Oliver Forge, who had more than a plum in his voice. I reckon he'd got a whole tin of prunes. He'd confound our receptionist when he'd phone her up with a request. He'd say, "Oliver Forge, could they put in an order?" We obviously all took the mickey out of him, but I do remember saying to my colleagues that he could no more change the way he spoke than any of the rest of us could. That was every year Sotheby's produced a book of the highlights of the sales of that year, and I had one of my photographs on the front cover that year. It's a Gauguin painting. One of the experts in the Japanese department, a chap called David McFarlane, told me a story about a lady bringing a Japanese vase into Sotheby's for evaluation. One a bit like that. That obviously isn't the one, as you'll find out quickly. On the way back from the department, the porter dropped it and broke it. So David had to go and break the news to the lady. He explained that she had 2 options. Either they would give her the value of the vase, or they would replace it as soon as a similar vase came into the department. She opted for the second choice. She hadn't brought it in to sell it, she just wanted the value, to know what it was worth. So when an appropriate replacement came in, it was David's job to take it down to her. He went on the tube, and halfway there, something happened, and he dropped it and broke it. He decided that, in the circumstances, he was more than half the way there. He might as well continue the journey and explain it to the lady in person. She opened the door and ushered him into the drawing room, where they both sat down. She then offered him a cup of tea, and as she stood up, being a well-brought-up chap, she stood also.
I know what's coming.
Yeah, of course. As she left the room, he sat down again, but on a different part of the sofa. And as he did so, there was a nasty crack. He jumped up and lifted the cushion on which he had sat and found a small lapdog with its neck broken. After a sickening moment of panic, he carefully replaced the cushion and sat back down in the place he'd been in previously, drank his tea and dashed out of the house as soon as politeness would allow. A story that I heard from a different source, but of a similar nature, concerns a buyer who had successfully bid for a very valuable vase at one of the auctions. As he was standing at the back of the room at the end of the sale, talking to the experts who were congratulating him on his acquisition, one of the porters came in and beckoned to one of the experts. When he went over to him, the porter whispered, "Oh, I'm really sorry, but we dropped it and smashed it." The expert thought for a second and said, "OK, can't be helped. Wrap it up anyway, and I'll think of something." He went back to the buyer and suggested that they should go through to the front counter, from where he would call for a taxi for him. As they stood there, the porter brought the vase in a large box, and they then waited for the taxi. When it arrived, the expert walked out into Bond Street with the buyer, and as they crossed the pavement, he contrived to trip him, causing him to drop the box. "Oh dear," he said, it may be okay. Let's go back inside and have a look." They put the box on the front counter and carefully opened it. Inside were several broken pieces of porcelain, each one individually wrapped in bubble. True story. I left Sotheby's and tried to survive by selling my work, but even though I sold a few paintings, it was obvious that it wouldn't pay the bills. Things were getting difficult, but I then had a stroke of luck when I was sitting in the Prince Regent pub in Marylebone on Burns night and got talking to a chap sitting at the bar called Duncan Clark. The conversation that the two of us had was extremely disjointed because he'd had a few too many whiskies. I think I had a couple himself, but not as many as him. In fact, he was convinced that someone had stolen one, and I think he'd drunk it. Anyway, the upshot was that he told me that he painted scenery for the theatre, and when I asked him if he had any work for me, he said, "Are you any good?" "Yes," I said, even though I hadn't painted scenery since I did the set for Sweeney Todd at school. "Great, when can you start?" "Monday?" "Fine." So that brings us to the end of book one. I'm just going to say a few words before we go back to Rachel. I spent more than a decade as a freelancer doing scenery, working for the likes of Andrew Lloyd Webber, Maria Bjornson, there's the lovely Maria, the designer of Phantom of the Opera. I worked on Phantom for her, and Tim O'Brien, who designed Evita. I got married and had two wonderful children who are over there. And then had a devastating accident on a film set where I broke my leg in two places and almost removed my nose. It was hanging down there. And then, partly as a result of the trauma, went through a hideous divorce. That was, of course, one of the biggest impacts of the accident, but it was life-changing in many other ways too, and I still feel the impact of it literally every day. I then landed a full-time job as a scenic artist at the Royal Opera House, where I worked until just before meeting Brona, my wife, who most of you know, and moving here. But all of this is in the next book. You'll have to wait for that. Won't be long. Thank you.
I'll never get over the dog story. Horrific.
Yeah.
And I had the tiniest input in this incredible book.
Oh, come on.
Anyway, so I know that it's brilliant. It's a great read. A lot of you have read it.
Rachel's been not just proofreader, she's been editor as well. Fabulous.
Oh, I only did it for the money. It is a brilliant read. If you haven't bought a copy yet, I suggest you do. If you have, you'll know how great it is. And this is only, so far, book one. There's at least one more to come.
Yeah, it's nearly finished. I'm up to 2022. 3 more years to go.
So where did we get to on this one? The 80s?
1990.
1990. Right, okay. So why an autobiography? And why now?
Right. Well, the thing that started it off, actually, was Philip in the back there, who, as I say, I've known for 55 years and 2 months. He's sitting in the pub with him. As I said, most of our best discussions happen in the pub. He said, if you imagine that you discovered that a great-great-grandfather of yours had been an artist, or great-great-grandmother of yours had been an artist, and they'd written an autobiography, wouldn't you want to read it? And I thought, well, yes. And actually, the point of the book is it's for people, in the future. It's for my kids. It's for Gabriel, my grandson. He's read quite a lot of the school bits and he loves it, especially the bit about Spud Longley. It's all true. And so I thought, well, okay, I've got quite a lot to say, and I'll just start writing it. It was about Brennan knows better than I do.
3 or 4 years?
4 years ago, maybe. She's been a big help. And initially it was just a whole string of anecdotes, with just kind of linking them all up. And I decided at the beginning that they'd either have to be of general interest to anybody reading, or they'd have to be funny. And a lot of them are, I hope, fairly funny.
I can vouch for that. It's a very, very, very funny book. So tell us about your writing process. For all the other writers in the room, people generally want to learn about your writing process. How long did it take? When did you write it? Did you sit down? Did you set time aside to do it? And am I right in thinking that you did it all on a mobile phone?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, it's down there. On Notes, on an Apple iPhone. It's a bit of a cop out, but actually it's a really good way to do it because it's something you've always got with you. And I write, not just, I don't just set time aside to do it. If I'm on a train or if I'm sitting waiting for a bus or, whatever, it's just, I can write a little bit, about the book then. And I generally edit it as I go along, and then, kind of reread it and think, yeah, that's okay. You've done the important job of saying, you can't say that. Things like that. Yeah, a few stories which I would have put in, but we decided against it. So, does that answer that?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Well, I know obviously it's a book about you and your life, but so many other people were involved in your life. And as we know from the title, some things can get a little bit skewed over time, can't they?
Yes.
So I know that this was partly a collaborative process, wasn't it?
Yes.
Writing.
Yes. I mean, that's been, quite an eye-opener for me because obviously as a visual artist, I spent most of my time, in a little room, with a canvas and a paintbrush and, I don't have to interact in terms of the making of the art with anybody else at all. But since moving down here, I've done quite a few collaborations with other artists and they've been really interesting. And yeah, definitely the book has been a collaboration. I've spoken to Richard, as I say, we disagree about the or you an artist. He reckons it was when we were delivering work to the Royal Academy for the summer exhibition. He may be right. Who knows? I'm sticking to my story for the moment. Philip, I've spoken to a lot. I've talked to Peter Rumley. He figures in the book a lot, because I worked with him on a project which you can read about if you read it. So having the input has been great. And yes, it has been a collaboration, which is it's just fascinating. And little stories that I'd completely forgotten. And Philip mentioned two of them to me a while back. They've gone in the book, so I don't remember them, but he did, so fair enough.
Fair enough. Okay. Now, there's a certain amount of vulnerability in writing an autobiography, isn't there? You have to lay yourself open to criticism, to judgment, perhaps. And you've also, like I said earlier, you've mentioned some very intimate moments, like your cherry-popping rooftop experience. So how did it feel to be so vulnerable, to lay yourself open like that?
It's interesting. I mean, it is. It does make me feel vulnerable. And, anybody who's read my book knows, rather more about me than I might otherwise say. But in a lot of ways, I'm used to that because for me, putting a load of my paintings on the wall of a gallery, and allowing people in to look at them is a little bit like taking your clothes off in public. You're laying your soul bare, to the world. And I haven't had a lot of adverse criticism, but I've had my share. And so, yeah, in some ways I'm used to it.
Mm. And so how does writing compare to painting?
Yeah. Well, I suppose the thing with painting is, as Philip will certainly agree, I've done demonstrations for local art groups and things where, I'm working continuously for an hour with a tea break in the middle, or maybe 2 hours actually. And I often say at the end of that, this is nothing like what the real process of painting is like, because I'll probably spend 20 minutes at it, sort of hammer and tongs, and then I will stop and spend an hour just sitting looking. And the looking and the thinking. In fact, Philip has a great story. I love it, which is when partway through a painting, he will slip out and go downstairs for a cup of coffee. And then after he's had his cup of coffee, he'll come back up to the studio and he'll creep into the studio, hoping the painting can't see him coming so he can catch it unawares. And this is the thing, is that, if you're working, in front of a painting, for a big chunk of time, after a while you can't see it properly. You're just, you're so kind of immersed into it that you can't be objective. So that going out and coming back. And I think in terms of writing, it's a similar thing in that what I do with the book is I will put bullet points on my phone. Things I think, right, I need to mention that. Must get them in the right order, although it doesn't always matter. In fact, I've said somewhere in the book that I rather like Eric Morecambe's thing when he said on Mr. Preview, Andre Previn, when Previn said, "You're playing all the wrong notes," and Morecambe said, "I'm playing all the right notes, just not necessarily in the right order." So some of the stories in the book are not quite in the order that they have, but that doesn't matter, But so I put the bullet points in, and then I will flesh them out, and then I'll read that, think, is that all right? And then I'll read them to Brona sometimes, and she'll say, well, that doesn't really explain the thing properly, so I have to, because, sometimes you just assume that people know what you're talking about, and often they don't. So, it's similar in some ways, but, like all, art, it's a lot of thinking goes on.
Thank you. Now, you reminded me, I'd forgotten this, but I had said to you, do you realise what extraordinary life you had? Do you?
I think I possibly do now, but I don't think I did whilst I was, doing it. That doesn't suggest that it's all over, but even now, I don't think I realise quite how special this is. I might think afterwards, when we're sitting in Don Vincenzo's having a bit of grub, wow, that was amazing. At the time, it's like, oh, I've got to get this right. It has been an extraordinary life, but so much of it at the time, I would have been spending thinking, shit, I wish I wasn't here. I wish I didn't have to paint this bit of scenery or take this photograph or whatever. I wish I was at home in my studio painting. Because I've always had it in my mind that that's my primary role in life. I now know, 40, 50 years later, that actually that wouldn't have suited me. I enjoy being out in the world. Painting scenery for the theatre, sometimes it's a lonely process, as Phoebe will know. Phoebe has taken over from me in the scene painting, and she didn't intend to be an artist, but she's just as good as I am in terms of painting scenery. I'd also like to say that Will, my son, is also an artist. He's a tattoo artist. If anybody wants a tattoo, go and speak to him. He's absolutely brilliant. What was I was talking about? Just this thing of realizing that being out in the world, and working with other people and exchanging ideas, that's more how I am. I'm not really the kind of person who's happy. Frank Auerbach, the greatest artist this country has produced in years, died just recently. His life was, got up, had breakfast, went to the studio, painted, had a cheese and pickle sandwich, painted a bit more, went home, had dinner, went to bed. Repeat that 364 times a year, because Christmas he used to have a day off. Then after a while he decided he was actually being a bit lazy and only had half the day off at Christmas. That's fine, and what a great artist he is. That's not how I am. So I think in retrospect I realised I actually had a really good time.
I have to say you've met some very interesting people as well, haven't you, along the way? You've been very, very fortunate. Some of you liked, some of you didn't like. I don't want to spoil any stories, but how do you think about the people that you've come into contact with, the well-known ones? Or
right.
The other ones?
I can talk about some of them, but maybe not all. I did meet Damien Hirst one time. It was one of the carpenters I worked with in one of the scenery companies. He said, oh, Simon, you must meet this chap. He's my daughter's boyfriend. And it was Damien Hirst. And I didn't know him from a bar of soap. He was very dismissive of me. And I thought, oh, well, sod you then. And then a few weeks later, Kevin, the carpenter, said, oh, you know that chap I introduced you to? And I said, yeah. He said, well, he's now famous. He's done that dead cow in the tank. So he's dropped my daughter. Not seeing her anymore. I said, oh, what an arsehole. Pardon me. I don't have a lot to say about him, but I've met David Hockney, who was a delightful man, and John Craxton, who I work with, equally delightful man, complained of his arthur-wrongness. He says there's nothing right about arthritis. And, well, obviously you've seen Maria up there. Yeah, quite a lot of people I've bumped into along the way. There are several others. They all come into the book. Yeah.
All in the book.
And in the index. That's a joke.
And the less said about the boiled pig, the better, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah, horrible man.
So, would you like to say something about your work, about your art?
Yeah, maybe we should have some images. Oh, yes. That's Borough Market, which some of you will know, on the Thames. That's an early-ish painting. And what we got next? Oh, it's a cloud drawing. A lot of you will know I'm a bit into skies. Oh, and then, yeah, when I was working at the Opera House, when the kids were little, it was a full-time job, and they were with me alternate weekends and 2 or 3 evenings a week, and I had less and less time to paint during the daytime. So I thought, well, sod it, I'll just have to paint at night. So I started painting night scenes. That's Hackney. I've done loads in Medway as well. A lot of you have seen them. And I quite like the thing of using, street lights for lighting, because street lights don't move like the sun does, and clouds don't get in the way. So it's kind of apparently there. That was in Italy when I was with Philip. We were restoring frescoes and wall paintings in Italy, and I did that. And yeah, another one from there. Another one. Oh, that's an apple tree. A lot of you have seen it's on the wall in our dining room sometimes when we have house gigs. Yeah, we'll pause at that one. That's the Thames from Bermondsey. And my take on landscape painting has been, well, the history of landscape painting is quite interesting, because it didn't really start until the Industrial Revolution. And I think it was when people started realizing that we were risking losing our landscape, all under, miles of concrete and smoke and mills and factories and all that. And so I'm part of that tradition, of course, but also what I like is, what I'm not so much like, I'm interested in, is our relationship with the natural world. We are obviously part of it, and yet we often feel alienated from it. And I'm reminded, I don't know if any of you have ever read the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's probably one of the first bits of writing ever in the world, written in Mesopotamia, when there was such a place. And it tells the story, part of the story is of a figure, a character called Enkidu, who is kind of part man, part animal. And he's on his hands and knees drinking from a water hole. And then at some point, he receives some kind of, what's the word I want? A kind of an awakening, an experience that lifts him above the animal. And at that point, all the animals run away from him. And that feeling of loss, of no longer being part of the natural world, I think was really important in the book. And, bear in mind, that's about the oldest thing written in this world. I think that has kind of gone down the line of all of our writing ever since, this feeling of, are we part of the world or are we not? And I think with my landscape painting, I'm aware of that, that dichotomy, and that, it's quite painful in a way to think that you're somehow separate, and yet we're not. The other thing that's important in my painting is that the subject matter is the least important of the three main elements. So I've always thought that subject matter, the composition, therefore the arrangement of abstract shapes, and the light are the three most important things, but subject matter is the least important. And in some ways, it's the abstract pieces of paint. In fact, Alan, who's standing over there, who came to me for lessons some years ago, one of the first things he remembers me saying is, remember that a painting is made up of pieces of paint, which is something that our tutor, when we were at art school, said to us. And interesting that my friend Rachel, who's sitting here, her daughter has one of my paintings. And Rachel said that she said to her a while back, don't you think you should put it on the wall somewhere at a distance so you can see it properly. She says, no, Mummy, I actually want to see it right up close because I like the fact that it's all these different bits of paint, which is so perceptive, so interesting. So yeah, the painting has to have a life of its own, separate from the subject. Oh, well, yeah, that's just up the road from us. That's Shoulder of Mutton Wood. Another one? Oh, and there's my lovely wife. And yeah, that's a sky from, we went up to the northeast, up to Northumberland, and that's Dunstanburgh Castle. I was very interested when we were in Dunstanburgh to try and find the spot that Turner had painted. And I went down on the beach, worked out exactly what it was, and there's this bloody great big boulder on the beach. And I thought, well, that can't have just arrived. No, wrong way around. There isn't a boulder. There's a boulder in his painting. And I thought, where's he got that from? Well, he obviously invented it. So, yeah, he's an artist. He's allowed to. Is that it? Oh, yeah, that's Shropshire. That's possibly the last one, is it? That's the last. Great. Okay, so there's a selection of my work up there. Okay, was there anything?
Yeah. So obviously, painting's your first love. Well, Brown is your first love.
Absolutely, she is.
Your lovely children.
Yeah, and my lovely children.
So you're...
The triumvirate.
Yes. So you're going to keep painting, but you're also writing book 2?
I'm writing book 2.
What can we expect from book 2, and how far is that going to go up?
Right.
To? And can we please have a book 3?
I've decided that book 2, I'm just going to raise this a little bit more. I'm feeling punched. Book 2, as I said, I've got up to 2022, so I've only got 3 years to go. They've been a busy 3 years, so it'll take me a while. But I'm going to stop book 2 at this point, this reading. That will be the final thing in the book, in book 2. And after that, I shall say, but these are the half dozen, actually, no, it's more like a dozen projects I've got in mind, that I'll be working on, in the foreseeable future. One of the projects I'm going to mention, because I brought an example of it with me today. This was, Brona and I were in Kithera, in April or May of this year, sitting in this square, having a cup of coffee, and I noticed all these really interesting old geezers riding around, long grey hair, ponytails, beards, dark glasses on their heads, riding motorbikes, no crash helmets, of course. And I thought, God, what interesting faces these guys have. You know, a face that tells the history of a life, and eyes that sparkle with a sort of joie de vivre. And I thought, I'd like to do a series of heads, celebrating not age, but experience and life. And it took me quite a while to pluck up the courage to go and talk to one of these chaps. But I did. I went up, spoke to him in the bar. He didn't speak a word of English. I speak even less Greek. But somehow, I don't know if it was sign language or what, but, I explained what I wanted to do, and he let me take a photograph of him. That was the second one of what will be a series of about 15 of them. The first one, which I brought with me, is of our friend Frank. He's 95, I think. He's a dancer. I said to him one time, I said, God, you're a great dancer, Frank. He said, yeah. He said, my walking's not so great, but my dancing's quite good. So I'll show you Frank. Rachel. Drum roll, please. There he is. So they're all that size, mostly male at the moment. There's one woman. There's going to be some more, and and I'll have a show of heads of people who've had lives.
Lovely. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Great.
That is about time.
Is it? Oh, crikey!
Come up and commend you.
Oh,
and say thank you for coming to Medway Rivulet.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you. Thank you.
You have a picture of yours from this year's Italian stuff, Bob.
Have I?
Yeah, this is the biggest one. We maybe budgie out of Susie and the Banshees will get more people, but He's a rock star, but you are a rock star of this sort. I mean, I'm a writer. I don't know about art at all, but I mean, nobody paints like him. I don't think anyone does that I've met. I just like the way they.
Oh, thank you.
It's a really, really interesting book. I would say, really, really, please do buy it. We have installed a table at the back of here so he can rush down there and sit behind it.
I will
So
do
if
that.
you bought it, you can get his signature or whatever, paw print or whatever he wants. File back around because, not too long after, we'll be following Maria McCarthy. We do not want to miss her. I've noticed we're all in front of the family saga here, which is pretty much perfect for what we're doing. Okay, so go and buy that book.
Can I just quickly say thank you to Rachel
Yes,
for
do, indeed.
the interview, and as I say, proofreading and editing. Thank you. And thank you to Phoebe and Will and Brona for all of your help, you guys.
It's a great read.
1990. Oh dear. That's it. Okay. Yeah.
Did you sit down?
Thank you. I mean, it is. No? Okay. Oh. Wow, that was amazing. Okay. He's a dancer. Oh, it's a cloud drawing.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah.
Just like the way
It doesn't always matter.
Are you good to go?
Sorry. There we are.
All in the book. Very, very, very funny book.
Now, no.
Great. I mean,
Yeah, of course. That's, yeah.
yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I did. Well, so thank you. All right. So, yeah. I said, yeah. Oh, yes. And, yeah, the triumvirate.
Yeah.
Yeah. Crikey.
Commend you.
Oh.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
So I know that it's brilliant.
There are several others. Let's go back inside and have a look. I'm going to go straight into the book. Thank you.
This is the biggest one.
He said, it may be okay. So, a Gauguin painting.
When did you start selling them?
Thank you. Wow, that was amazing. Okay. He's a dancer. Oh, it's a cloud drawing. It's interesting.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah.
Just like the way
It doesn't always matter.
Are you good to go?
Sorry? Sorry. There we are. And in the index.
Very, very funny book.
No, so unfair. Yeah, of course. That's, yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I did. Well, I smiled.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, yes. And, yeah, the triumvirate. Yeah. Crikey.
Commend you.
Oh.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I didn't.
I know that it's brilliant.
There are several others. Let's go back inside and have a look. I'm going to go straight into the book. Thank you.
Biggest one.